There is a version of you sitting somewhere in the future who has already survived everything you're currently afraid of. Let that sink in for a second. Somewhere down the timeline of your life, there's a version of you who made it through the heartbreak, who climbed out of the financial collapse, who healed from the betrayal, who stopped shaking every time the phone rang with bad news. And that version of you is not special. That version of you is not luckier than you. That version of you simply did one thing that you have not done yet. They let go. They stopped white-knuckling their grip on the wheel of a life that was never asking them to drive it alone. And here's the question that should keep you up tonight. What if the very thing you are gripping onto right now, the anger, the shame, the I have to control everything or it all falls apart, what if that is the exact thing standing between you and the life you keep praying for? What if your suffering isn't a punishment? It's a summons, a call, because make no mistake, every single human being on this planet, no matter how rich, how spiritual, how disciplined, how together they appear on the outside, gets called. Life doesn't ask permission. It doesn't check your calendar. It shows up in the middle of your ordinary Tuesday and cracks you open. And in that moment, you have exactly two options: resist or grow. Most people resist. They clench their jaws and grip harder. They try to control the uncontrollable, manage the unmanageable, force outcomes that were never theirs to force. And in that gripping, they miss the whole point of the call, because the call was never about the crisis. The call was about you. It was an invitation to finally put down the weight you were never built to carry alone. So today, we are not going to talk about hustles. We are not going to talk about grinding harder or manifesting your way into a Lamborghini. Today, we're going to talk about something far more dangerous, far more liberating, and far more necessary: the art of letting go and the terrifying, exhilarating act of trusting yourself enough to walk forward without the map. Because somewhere along the way, you were taught that control equals safety. You were taught that if you just hold on tight enough, plan hard enough, worry enough, you can prevent the bad thing from happening. And I need you to hear this clearly. That belief has been quietly running your life, and it has been lying to you the entire time. Stay with me here, because in the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly why your grip is the problem, not the solution. Why 50% of the pain you carry from your past isn't even accurate anymore. Why your focus is quite literally building the walls of the prison you think life put you in, and how, and by the end of this, you are going to understand something that changes the entire architecture of how you move through the world. This is not a pep talk. This is a rewiring. Let's start here. You don't experience life. You experience the life you focus on. Read that again. It's not a cute quote for a coffee mug. It is the single most important operating principle of the human mind, and almost nobody uses it on purpose. Your brain is not a camera capturing objective reality. Your brain is a filtering system, and what it filters for is determined by where you point out your attention. Two people can sit in the exact same room, live through the exact same event, and walk away with two entirely different realities, because one of them focused on what was lost and the other focused on what was learned. Same room, same event, different universes. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Look, if you do not consciously control your focus, you don't get to choose your emotional state. You just react. Something happens, a text left unread, a comment from your mother, a missed opportunity, and instantly your mind asks a silent question underneath the noise. Is this the end, or is this the beginning? Is this person attacking me, or are they trying clumsily to reach me? Is this rejection or redirection? And whatever meaning you assign in that split second, that meaning produces an emotion. And that emotion, whether you like it or not, drives the decision you make next. Meaning creates emotion. Emotion drives decisions. And decision creates your entire life. One choice stacked on top of another, until one day you look up and wonder how you got here. Most people think they are responding to their circumstances. They are not. They are responding to the story they told themselves about their circumstances, and they've been telling that same exhausting story for so long, they've forgotten it was ever a choice. Now here's the part that should genuinely shake you. Recent psychological research has shown something almost unbelievable. A huge portion of the story you tell about your own past isn't even factually true anymore. Memory is not a video recording sitting untouched in a vault. Every time you replay a painful memory, your brain reconstructs it, and in the reconstruction, it adds a little color here, a little exaggeration there, a little more villain to the other person, and a little more victim to you. So the wound you keep reopening, the version of the event you keep telling at dinner parties and in the middle of the night when you can't sleep, may not even be the truth anymore. You might be reliving on a life you never actually had. And the tragedy is not what happened. The tragedy is that you are choosing every single day to happen again. Why would anyone do that to themselves? Because pain, strangely, becomes identity. If you've carried a wound long enough, it stops being something that happened to you and starts being something that defines you. You need the ex who broke your heart to stay in the villain, because if they're not the villain anymore, who are you? You need the toxic job, the impossible family member, the unfair situation, because as long as they exist, you have a reason. And reasons feel safer than responsibility. Reasons let you stay exactly where you are while still feeling like a victim of circumstance instead of an active participant in your own stagnation. But here's the truth nobody wants to hand you wrapped in comfort. Where you place your attention is where you place your power. Every minute you spend replaying the argument, rehearsing the resentment, refreshing the wound to keep it fresh, you are not punishing the person who hurt you. You are feeding them your life force from beyond the moment they left. They are living rent-free in your nervous system, and you are the one paying the bill night after night in cortisol and clenched shoulders and sleepless static at 3 in the morning. So let's ask the real question, not why did this happen to me, but what am I getting out of continuing to relive this? Because if you're honest, if you're brutally, uncomfortably honest, some part of you built an entire identity out of the very thing you claim you want to release. And letting go doesn't just mean forgiving the other person, it means grieving the version of yourself that needed the wound to make sense of the world. This is the moment in every transformation story where the character has to choose, cling to familiar misery, or take a terrifying step into an unfamiliar possibility. And I want you to notice something about human nature here, something almost nobody says out loud. Most people will choose the misery, not because they enjoy suffering, but because misery is known and the possibility is not. The devil you know feels safer than the freedom you don't. People will tell the story of their past on repeat, defending it like a courtroom lawyer, rather than risk believing in the future they cannot yet prove exists. They will believe more fiercely in what already broke them than in what could still save them. We live, most of us, in a kind of chronic disbelief, quietly convinced, somewhere underneath the surface performance of confidence, that we are not actually the ones steering for this ship. Think about it honestly. When something good happens, you get the promotion, you find the parking spot right in front, the timing lines up perfectly. How often is your first internal reaction, "Of course I created that"? And how often is it instead, "Wow, I got lucky"? We reserve the language of creation for the good days and the language of victimhood for the hard ones. That's not humility. That's a habit of disempowerment so deeply wired in that most people never even notice they're doing it. Now just imagine one moment, an entire world where people stopped outsourcing responsibility for their inner state. Imagine if instead of saying, "He made me so angry," or "She ruined my whole day," people said, "I allowed that moment to move in and set up residence in my mind to rent free." It sounds harsh. It sounds almost cruel to say it that way. but it is also the doorway to the only real freedom that has ever existed for anyone. The freedom that comes from realizing no external person, no external condition holds the master key to your internal world unless you hand it to them. Because here is the uncomfortable mechanism running quietly underneath all of this. The stronger the emotional charge you carry toward a person or an event from your past, the more attention you unconsciously give it. And the brain does not know the difference between attention given to something you love and attention given to something you hate. Attention is attention, and what you feed grows. So, if you spend your mental bandwidth reliving the betrayal, replaying the argument, rehearsing the version of events where you were wronged and they were wrong, you are quite literally feeding that event more life inside you than the actual event ever had in reality. It happened once, out there, in the world, but you have made it happen thousands of times here, in your nervous system, and your body cannot tell the difference. Each replay triggers the same chemical cascade as the original event, the same stress hormones, same tightened chest, same flooded senses. The event is over. Reliving is a choice, dressed up as a memory. And this is why change is so brutally difficult for most people, even when they desperately want it. It was never a matter of ability. Almost nobody fails to change because they lack the skill or intelligence or resources. People fail to change because they have not yet accumulated a strong enough reason to make the discomfort of transformation less painful than the comfort of staying the same. If you have a strong enough why, you can survive almost any how. But if your reasons are weak, borrowed, half-hearted, you will find every excuse in the world to stay exactly where you are. Dressed up as practicality, dressed up as realism, dressed up as I'm just being responsible. The truth is simpler and far less flattering. You haven't heard enough yet or wanted it badly enough yet to override the gravitational pull of your habits. So let this be the moment. Let this be the exact place in the video where you stop scrolling past your own life and start asking the only question that has ever mattered. Does this emotion belong in my future? Not was it valid, not was I right to feel it. Just does it belong to going forward because you decide that? Nobody else, not your mother, not your ex, not the boss who never appreciated you, not the version of you from 10 years ago who is still in some private corner of your mind waiting for an apology that may never come. And here is the part that will either terrify you or set you completely free, depending on how ready you are to hear it. The moment you decide to make a different choice than the one you made yesterday, you are going to feel deeply uncomfortable. That discomfort is not a sign you're doing it wrong. That discomfort is the exact sensation of stepping out of the known and into the unknown. And it is supposed to feel like that because your nervous system was built to protect the familiar, even when the familiar is what's slowly killing your spirit. Growth was never going to feel like relief on day one. It feels static, like vertigo, like standing at the edge of something you can't quite see at the bottom of it. And most people, the instant they feel that vertigo, retreat straight back into the identical choice they made the day before. Not because it serves them, but because it's known, and known feels safer than free. But I need you to understand something about the nature of that fear, because it is the hinge this entire message swings on. The fear you feel when you consider letting go of the grudge, the plan you're gripping too tightly, the person who left, the failure you can't stop replaying, the future you're trying to control down to the last detail. That fear is not evidence that letting go is dangerous. It is evidence that you have never actually practiced trusting yourself without a backup plan. You have spent your whole life building contingencies for a version of yourself you don't fully believe in. And that is the real wound underneath all the other wounds. Not the breakup, not failure, not betrayal. The quiet, corrosive belief that if you stop controlling everything for even 5 minutes, everything would collapse, because some part of you has never been given proof that you alone, without the grip, without the plan, without the constant vigilance, are actually enough to catch yourself. So we're gonna build that proof together right now. In the time we have left, I'm going to walk you through exactly what it looks like to release the grip without releasing your standards, to surrender the outcome without surrendering your effort, to trust yourself without needing certainty first, because certainty was never coming, and waiting for it has cost you years you will never get back. Because somewhere inside you, buried under the noise of everyone else's expectations, there's a truth waiting to be remembered. What if you are greater than you currently believe? What if you are more resourceful, more resilient, and more deeply capable than any story you've ever told about your limitations? What if the parking space version of "the universe is on my side" is not a cute affirmation, but a literal operating principle, that you are, in fact, the primary author of the story you keep calling your life, and you've simply been writing in someone else's handwriting for so long you forgot your own voice existed? If that were true, if you really are the creator here, not the character things simply happen to, then every excuse, every grudge, every carefully rehearsed reason why you can't yet move forward starts to look less like protection and more like a cage you built with your own hands and now defend as if someone else installed the locks. Let's talk about what it actually costs you to keep living like this. And more importantly, let's talk about how the letting go actually happens, not as a one-time decision you make in a dramatic moment, but as a quiet, daily discipline that eventually becomes who you are, because the goal was never to arrive at a life with no pain. Pain is part of being alive, and anyone who promises you a painless existence is selling you something. The goal is to become the kind of person who can feel the pain fully, honestly, and still choose their next action from clarity instead of panic. There is a difference between numbness and mastery, and it's a difference almost nobody teaches you, and it's exactly where we're headed next. Think about the athlete who has trained their body so thoroughly that pain no longer dictates their decisions the way it once did. It's not that the pain disappeared, the pain is still there every single time. What changed is the relationship between the sensation and the reaction. Early on, discomfort screamed, "Stop, retreat, this is bad." And the untrained mind obeyed instantly without question. But with enough repetition, enough deliberate exposure to that same discomfort, something shifts. The pain arrives, and instead of hijacking the decision immediately, there's a beat, a pause, a space where you get to look at the sensation and ask calmly, does this actually require me to change course right now? Or can I simply carry this while I keep moving toward what matters? That pause, that tiny sliver of space between stimulus and response, is the entire location where freedom lives. Everything you've ever wanted to change about your life is hiding inside that pause, waiting for you to notice it exists. And this is inner work, not an outer hustle, not another system, another routine, another 5 a.m. alarm that promises to fix you from the outside in. This is the far quieter, far harder work of turning your attention inward and asking, honestly, without flinching, what is it that I am actually made of? What have I been avoiding looking at because some part of me suspected it might hurt to see clearly? Because here is the secret that every tradition, every philosophy, every genuinely transformed human being eventually discovers on their own. You cannot heal what you refuse to illuminate. The parts of yourself that remain in the dark do not disappear simply because you look away from them. They wait. They shape your reactions from the shadows. They leak out sideways into your relationships, your health, your sleepless nights, dressed up as anxiety or anger, or a vague, low-grade dissatisfaction you can't quite name. There's only one way out of that particular prison, and it is not comfortable, but it is simple. You become transparent to yourself. You stop flinching away from the parts of your story that shame you. You stop performing a version of yourself even in the privacy of your own mind. Imagine, just for a moment, living every hour of your life as though someone who loves you unconditionally was quietly watching. Not to judge you, but to witness you honestly. Not the curated version, not the highlight reel. The real one is, what would you do differently? What would you finally stop pretending to be? That imagined witness is not some external judge. It is the version of you who have already done the healing, watching the version of you who haven't yet, with nothing but patience. Here's something worth noticing before we go any further. Trust in yourself is not building the way people think it is. Nobody wakes up one random morning suddenly overflowing with self-trust because they read the right quote or watch the right video. Self-trust is built the exact same way trust between two people is built, through small, repeated acts of keeping your word, even when it's inconvenient, even when no one is watching, even when it would be easier to break the promise and no one would ever know. Every time you say you'll wake up early and you don't, you are not just losing an hour of productivity. You are quietly teaching your own nervous system that your word means nothing. And your nervous system is always listening. It keeps score silently in the background, and it uses that score to decide how much risk it will let you take in the future. If you have spent years breaking small promises to yourself, of course leaping into the unknown terrifies you. Some part of you have learned through hard evidence that you cannot be relied upon. That's not a character flaw, that's a pattern, and patterns can be rewritten. So imagine starting today you begin stacking evidence in the other direction. Not through some dramatic overhaul of your entire existence, but through absurdly small, almost laughably tiny commitments that you keep without exception. You said you'd drink the water first thing in the morning, you drink the water. You said you'd sit in silence for 2 minutes before checking your phone. You sit in silence for 2 minutes. It sounds too small to matter. It is not too small. It is in fact the only thing that has ever mattered, because trust is not built in the grand gesture. It is built in the 1,000 invisible moments nobody else will ever witness, where you had the chance to abandon yourself and chose not to. This is the quiet architecture underneath every person you've ever admired for their calm, their certainty, their apparent fearlessness in the face of chaos. It was never that they had less fear than you. It was that they had more proof than you. Proof. Collected one kept promise at a time, that when things get difficult, they do not abandon themselves. And that proof is available to you too. It has been available for this entire time. It simply requires you to stop waiting for a single dramatic transformation and start accumulating 1,000 undramatic ones. Notice too what happens to your relationship with the past once you understand all of this clearly. The past stops being a life sentence and starts being raw material. Nothing more, nothing less. Every wound you've survived, every version of yourself you've had to leave behind, every belief you once held that no longer serves the person you're becoming, none of it needs to be erased, and none of it needs to be worshipped either. It simply needs to be witnessed, honest, and then released. The way you'd finally set down a bag you didn't realize you'd been carrying for years until your shoulders finally remembered what it felt like to be light. We are going to go deeper into exactly how you do this, Isa, how the letting go turns from a concept into a lived daily practice, how you rebuild trust in yourself one small kept promise at a time, and how you finally stop waiting for permission from your past to build the future you actually want. But before we go there, I want you to sit with everything you've just heard, not analyzing it, not arguing with it, just sit with it, the way you'd sit with a friend who finally told you the truth you've been avoiding for years. Because the next part of this is where the real transformation begins, where letting go stops being a nice idea you nod along to and becomes the exact hinge your whole life starts turning on. All right, enough sitting in the feeling, enough understanding. Understanding was never the destination, it was the ignition of a switch. And now it's time to talk about what happens the moment you actually turn the key, because here's the part nobody puts in the highlight reel. The moment you decide to let go and build something real, your life does not become easier, it becomes louder. Every fear you've been avoiding shows up at once, banging on the door, demanding you turn back. And this is exactly where most people quit, right at the threshold, 1 inch before the breakthrough, because nobody warned them it was supposed to feel like this. So let's talk about the shift. Not the soft, dreamy version of transformation you see in a 30-second reel with piano music underneath it. The real one is the one that smells like sweat at midnight and tastes like the coffee that's gone cold on your desk because you forgot to drink it 3 hours ago. The one where your hands shake slightly from exhaustion and you keep going anyway. That's the shift. And if you've never lived through it, you cannot understand it from the outside. You have to walk directly into the fire and let it reshape you. Here's the first truth about the grind that almost nobody tells you honestly. There is no escape velocity. Picture a rocket on the launch pad. In that first moment of ignition, the fuel burn is savaged. The loudest, most violent, most energy-consuming moment of the entire flight because gravity is at its heaviest and the inertia is at its worst. That's exactly where you are right now if you've just decided to change. You are on the pad. The engines are screaming and you need every ounce of fuel you can find. Use the old wound. Use the chip on your shoulder. Use the version of you that got overlooked, underestimated, laughed at. Use it as rocket fuel, not because bitterness is a virtue, but because right now in this exact moment of maximum resistance, you need combustion more than you need comfort. But, and these matters, that fuel source is not meant to power you forever. As the rocket climbs, the boosters fall away. The chip on your shoulder that got you off the ground will eventually become dead weight if you keep carrying it past the point it served you. Somewhere in the middle of your climb, you have to let that fuel drop into the ocean behind you and switch to a cleaner source. Purpose, discipline, love for the work itself instead of hatred for where you started. If you're still running old resentment 10 years into your transformation, you haven't grown. You've just gotten really good at being angry with better branding. And here's the part that separates the ones who make it from the ones who quietly give up and call it being realistic. Nobody warns you about the lonely chapter. This is the stretch of the road where you have already outgrown your old circle but haven't yet built the new one. You stop drinking, and suddenly your friends who go to the bar every Friday feel like strangers wearing familiar faces. You start waking up at 5 to train your mind and your body, and the people you used to talk to for hours now bore you within minutes because you're speaking a different dialect now, a language built from discipline instead of complaint. This is not you becoming arrogant. This is not what you think you're better than anyone. This is simply the friction of growth, and if nobody warned you it was coming, it can feel like something is wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. You are exactly on schedule. And the lonely chapter is uncomfortable specifically because it strips away your validation supply. The old group gave you laughs, belonging, and instant comfort. The new path gives you what exactly? Uncertainty, silence, a meditation streak nobody's applauding, a gym session nobody's filming, a book you're reading alone at 11 at night while the group chat lights up without you in it. It is so much easier at that moment to just go back, rejoin the chat, order the drink, melt back into what's familiar. And most people do exactly that, not because they're weak, but because nobody trained them for how much discipline it takes just to endure being different for a while. So hear this clearly, because it will save you months of unnecessary doubt. Self-doubt is not a sign that you're doing this wrong. Every single person who has ever walked from where they were to somewhere they actually wanted to have walked directly through a fog of doubt, self-pity, and uncertainty the entire way. There is no clean, cinematic version where the clouds part and your conviction never waver again. That version exists in movies with a 3.5-minute training montage set to triumphant music. Real transformation doesn't come with a soundtrack. It comes with 4 years of showing up when it feels like nothing is happening, when there's no glory, when there isn't even a promise that glory is coming, and you do it anyway. You do it tired. You do it sadly. You do it lonely. You do it without a role model standing there clapping for you, because if you wait for someone to hold your hand through this, you may be waiting for the rest of your life. Now let's talk about strategy, because raw grit without direction just burns you out faster in the wrong direction. And that's not tough. That's a waste. The first thing you need to understand is the difference between observable and hidden metrics, because most people, without realizing it, are optimizing their entire life for the wrong scoreboard. Observable metrics are the ones everyone can see. The job title, the salary, the size of the house, the car in the driveway, the follower count. Hidden metrics are the ones nobody sees, but you feel every single day. Your peace of mind at 11 p.m., the quality of your sleep, the depth of your relationships, your ability to be fully present with the people you love without your mind sprinting 3 tasks ahead. And here's the brutal math nobody runs before it's too late. People will trade an hour of commute time, one of the single most reliably miserable variables in modern life, for a slightly better title, without ever asking what that hour actually cost them, in connection and rest in the version of themselves that had time to simply exist. You can win every observable metric in the game and still lose the only life that was ever actually yours. This is where you have to get ruthless with your own definition of success, because if you don't define it deliberately, the culture around you will define it for you, and it will hand you a scoreboard designed to keep you chasing forever. There's a name for the particular exhaustion this produces. Some call it productivity dysmorphia, the inability to actually see or feel your own output, no matter how much it exists. It's the invisible tax sitting at the intersection of burnout, imposter syndrome, and anxiety, where your ambition becomes a second personality that whispers not enough no matter what you accomplish. Picture an athlete whose coach only ever points out the mistakes and never once acknowledges the win. That athlete doesn't get sharper, that athlete gets hollow. And that is exactly the internal coach a shocking number of high performers carry around in their own skull. A drill sergeant who allows at best a tie for the day, never a win, because the moment you feel proud, the whisper says, "Don't get comfortable. Tomorrow it starts all over again." If that voice is running your life, you are not disciplined. You are simply exhausted in a way that looks productive from the outside. So the strategy is not to work harder in the dark, chasing a scoreboard that was never designed to let you feel finished. The strategy is to work with brutal focus towards something you have named on your own terms, and then hold that goal in your mind relentlessly. From the second you open your eyes to the second you close them at night. Not obsession that poisons your peace, focus that organizes your energy. There's an old, simple idea buried in every serious discipline, whether it's a fighter's training camp or a monk's morning practice. Whatever you do, don't lose the goal from the mind. Let it sit quietly behind every decision. What do you eat? Who do you spend your evening with? What you watch before bed? Every single one of those choices either moves you a millimeter closer to the person you're building or a millimeter further away. There is no neutral. Time doesn't pause just because you're not paying attention to where it's taking you. And growth, real growth, happens specifically at the edge of what's comfortable, never in the center of it. Picture a zone just slightly beyond your current capacity. Not so far beyond it that you break, but far enough that it demands something new from you. Stretch too little and nothing changes. You stay exactly the size you've always been. Stretch too far, too fast, and you shatter, and the setback costs you more time than patience would have. But find that narrow, deliberate edge, the place where the discomfort is real but survivable. And something remarkable happens. Your capacity is expanding. Your resilience compounds. The task that used to intimidate you becomes eventually almost boring. And that's exactly the signal to find the next edge and lean into it again. Almost every major turning point you can look back on in your own life, if you're honest, was born from your lowest point, not your most comfortable one. Comfort has never once produced a breakthrough. Comfort produces maintenance. Breakthroughs are always forged at the edge. Here's something worth sitting with, because it will change how you relate to every hard day from this point forward. Problems are not a bug in the system of life. They are the system. There's no future version of your existence where problems stop existing. There's only a future version where the problems change shape, change size, change category. The flight gets delayed because flights are delayed. That's not an injustice being done to you personally. That's simply the operating condition of being alive inside a complex, imperfect world. The moment you stop expecting a magical problem-free plateau to arrive is the exact moment you stop wasting energy, raging against reality, and start spending that same energy solving what's actually in front of you. And notice something else, something almost mathematical about human systems. Every organism, every company, every person is constantly expending energy just to resist falling back to the average. The universe does not reward you for trying to be exceptional. If anything, it quietly, relentlessly pulls you back toward typical, toward the mean, toward blending in with everyone else who gave up trying to be different. Staying atypical costs energy continuously forever. There is no point where you arrive and the pull disappears. So, if you're planning to build something uncommon, a body most people won't build, a business most people won't start, a mind most people won't cultivate, you had better budget for that cost. You cannot simply add a demanding new pursuit onto an already maxed out life and expect it to work through sheer willpower. Something has to be subtracted to make room for what you're building. The energy has to come from somewhere. Discipline isn't just about adding more. It's about ruthlessly cutting what's leaking your energy in directions that don't serve the person you're becoming. This is precisely why the 5 old hindrances that quietly sabotage focus deserve your attention, not as some abstract philosophical concept, but as a practical diagnostic you can run on yourself daily. Sensory craving, where you find yourself constantly pulling more stimulation, more comfort, more instant gratification toward you instead of sitting with the discomfort of discipline. Ill will, where you spend precious energy pushing away people or situations you'd rather not face, when the truth is whatever you resist tends to persist and often returns even stronger. Sluggishness, the heavy fog that convinces you to rest, is the same thing as collapse. Restlessness, the itch that keeps you jumping from task to task without ever finishing what actually matters. And self-doubt, the quiet voice insisting you're not the kind of person who finishes things. Name whichever one is running the show in you right now. Naming it is the first act of taking your power back from it, because an unnamed pattern controls you silently, but a named pattern becomes something you can finally work with instead of something working on you from the shadows. Now let's talk about the trap that quietly kills more grinders than laziness ever will. The provisional life. This is the strange, seductive belief that your real life hasn't actually started yet. You tell yourself, once the debt is paid off, once the promotion comes through, once the business finally breaks even, then I'll actually start living. Then I'll rest, then I'll enjoy it, then I'll make myself feel proud. And so you keep postponing the actual experience of being alive, treating this current stretch of your existence as a kind of waiting room, a rehearsal for a performance that keeps getting pushed back in another quarter, another year, another decade. Here's the problem with that strategy. There is no guaranteed curtain call. Life does not owe you the arrival of that future moment. In 3 generations, statistically, almost nobody will remember your name, not because your life doesn't matter, but because that's simply the scale of time we're all operating inside of. And if that fact doesn't shake something loose in you, if it doesn't grant you a strange, sudden permission to stop performing a joyless version of discipline and start actually living inside the grind instead of merely enduring it until some imagined finish line, then the grind will hollow you out long before it ever pays off. So here's the recalibration the strategy demands. Stop treating the hard season as a toll you're paying to reach some future reward, and start treating it as the actual material of your life happening right now, whether you notice it or not. Late at the desk is not a sacrifice of your real life. It is your real life, this version of it, the one you're building right now with your own hands. Find the version of discipline that still lets you laugh at how ridiculous some of this is. Life is inherently a little absurd, wildly temporary, and guaranteed to end. And there is something almost liberating buried inside that truth if you let it in instead of running from it. You do not need to punish yourself for your goals. You can walk toward them fiercely and still let yourself enjoy the walk. And here is a piece of the grind almost nobody talks about, honestly, because it doesn't fit the aesthetic of hustle culture. You cannot out-discipline an unforgiven past. You can build the perfect morning routine, optimize every hour of your calendar, train your body into something unrecognizable from where you started, and still sabotage the entire structure from the inside if you have not done the quieter, harder work of forgiveness. Not just forgiving the people who hurt you, though that matters. Forgive yourself, because most people direct their harshest judgment inward, replaying the mistake, the wasted years, the version of themselves that didn't know better yet, and they call that judgment accountability, when really it's just old pain wearing a productive sounding disguise. You cannot walk fully into your future while a courtroom is still running inside your head, prosecuting a version of you that no longer exists. At some point, the discipline required is not another rep, another hour, another task completed. The discipline required is closing the file on who you used to be without needing them to have been perfect to deserve your compassion now. This is where doing and being having to finally reconcile, because for a long stretch of the grind, you will be almost entirely obsessed with doing, chasing the goal, hunting the metric, proving something to somebody, maybe even proving something to a version of yourself from years ago who felt invisible. And there's nothing wrong with that fuel early on, but eventually you have to ask yourself the uncomfortable question underneath the achievement. What am I actually trying to fill? Because if the goal exists purely to fix a feeling of lack, you will hit that goal and discover the lack is still sitting there, waiting, already whispering about the next target. The strategy that actually holds up over decades, not just over a good quarter, is the one that was doing flows out of being instead of trying to manufacture it. You do the work because of who you already are, not to finally become someone worth being. That shift alone will save you years of chasing a finish line that keeps quietly moving every time you get close. None of these are comfortable. None of this was ever supposed to be comfortable, but there is a version of you closer than you think who has already done the hardest part of this climb, who has already burned through the launchpad fuel, already survived the lonely chapter, already learned to hold the goal in mind without losing themselves in the waiting. And the only bridge between you and that version is this: showing up again tomorrow at the edge of what's uncomfortable, even when nobody's watching, even when there's no soundtrack, even when it feels like absolutely nothing is happening beneath the surface, because something always is.